The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
New Homes Solar Generation Bill, second reading.
I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. And I do so... sorry.
I think the member may want to say now.
Now.
Max Wilkinson.
Apologies, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very new. I move this bill with sunshine in my heart. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am an environmentalist. I have fought for years to improve the housing market in my town, Cheltenham, and I strongly believe we all deserve a fairer deal on the cost of living. I was elected in July after campaigning on those three issues, and I move this bill today with those in mind. I thank members who have taken the time to attend today, and I urge them to retain a sunny disposition for the next few hours. I am, of course, happy to take interventions from across the House during this speech, but when I do so, I hope members will try not to throw too much shade. I promise warm responses regardless, and I hope the Minister will provide the same later on too. Because today we can all make a commitment to a brighter future by backing the Sunshine Bill. It will be a future in which people have lower household bills, a future in which we are less reliant on dirty and expensive fossil fuels, often imported from abroad. A future in which this country's energy supplies are more secure. This future is a vision that is supported by voters across political divides, and it is supported by industry too. But before I get into the core of my speech, think back just a few short years to the start of the energy bills crisis. Householders endured a 54% rise in the energy price cap in April 2022, and bills remain 43% higher today than they were before the crisis. That caused widespread fuel poverty. We all witnessed another shocking increase in food bank use. Businesses went bust, jobs were lost, family holiday plans were cancelled. The crisis also laid bare the short-sighted ideological decisions made in the past to slow down the rollout of renewable technologies. But imagine an alternative in which more homes included solar power generation during that crisis and this ongoing crisis. Bills could and should have been hundreds of pounds lower for everyone. Those individual householders would have been insulated against higher bills, and our nation would have been safer and stronger too. Food banks would have been less busy. The government would not have been forced to give such large subsidies to ensure people were able to get by. Now, at the heart of this discussion, there is the pressing need to tackle twin crises: the cost of living and climate change. As members will know, the climate change discussion often leads us to debates on difficult trade-offs. The government is currently grappling with those, and they have my good wishes in doing so. But solar energy generation on new-built homes is very much not in that category. This bill helps us tackle the cost of living and climate change too. A clear win-win. MCS Foundation research has shown that when combined with other technologies which will be widely available in the next few years, the payback period for a solar array on a 3-bed semi is just 4 years. Over a 25-year mortgage, the savings stand at a whopping £38,000. Solar technology also offers homeowners the chance to profit directly. The Energy Saving Trust estimates a typical household could make between £270 and £400 a year. On the environmental side, research by Solar Energy UK shows that buildings accounted for 20% of all UK emissions in 2023. The government has placed building new homes at the heart of its agenda. That is something that I am personally supportive of.
Will the Honourable Gentleman give way?
Of course.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I genuinely welcome this bill coming forward today, particularly as a discussion point. And as somebody who has brought 2 PMBs through the back benches, I wish him every success. It can be a long journey, though. But my point is on environmental, Madam Deputy Chairman and Deputy Speaker, and the Green Belt. And I hope perhaps he might have more to say this later, because in the shift towards more solar panels, I fear many of those are going at prime agricultural land. In a similar way, I'm really disappointed that in Walsall we've just seen the planning inspector give permission for a battery storage facility on the edge of my constituency, right on a conservation area. And I just feel very strongly that it's time we need to look at alternatives, look at where the solar panels are being placed as a way of protecting communities and our green belt.
Well, I thank the honourable member for, I believe, Aldridge Brown-Hills for her intervention. She is entirely right, and she will have noted, as members across this House will have noted, that the CPRE has taken a strong interest in this issue and in this bill for the reasons that she has raised, and I have a lot of sympathy with what she says. Efficient use of land and space in this country is extremely important. But if we are to achieve the new home building targets that the government has set out, we absolutely must ensure that new built homes are equipped for the challenges of the future. That includes climate change and looking after our environment. Without changing the standards for new housing stock, we do not just miss an economic opportunity, we put the environment at risk too. The government's own advisory body, the Climate Change Committee, has advised that the UK will not meet its emissions targets without the near-complete decarbonisation of housing stock. That's why it is so important that the new government, and specifically the Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, has moved the conversation along. Not least in an answer to a recent question I asked him before Christmas in this House, when he stated that he was very sympathetic to mandatory solar panels on new-built homes. And he is right, because the case to update regulations is irrefutable. The regulations which govern building work are set out in the Building Act 1984. That's the year I was born. And the Building Regulations 2010, which is so long ago that members will be disturbed to find out that I still had a large Brill cream bill in those days. The previous government consulted on the Future Home Standard, but was not able to respond before the general election. It is heartening to see that the current government has promised a response and to pick up that work. There will, of course, be strong pushback from some developers who will default to thinking about profit only. I understand that profit motive, but I would urge developers to think about the planet and what their customers are demanding. Of course.
I'm very pleased to see this bill here today, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm not quite so entranced by the member's puns occasionally, and the fact that he's just made me feel completely and utterly ancient will certainly go against him. However, on a serious point, would he agree with me that it's very important that we have a secure supply chain for solar panels, and that, for example, we eradicate the use of solar panels built by Uyghur people through enforced labour in China?
Of course, she raises a very reasonable point, and we need to be very clear that our supply chains in this country are free from slave labour. This is a matter for government procurement rules, and I understand there will be things coming through this House in due course on that matter. Now, I was saying that there will, of course, be strong pushback from some developers who will think about profit only, but I understand that motive. But those developers all know what we know. That's that this technology already exists, and that the Sunshine Bill is a relatively straightforward measure for them to implement. Solar panel technology has been available for many years. The construction industry is already accustomed to working with it. Mandating installation at the construction stage is logical. It not only removes the burden from homeowners and places the responsibility with the developer.
On that issue, would the honourable member give way?
Of course.
I thank the honourable member for bringing this bill before the House. Is such an important one. It almost feels like a no-brainer. I've spoken to so many of my residents who share with me their frustrations of trying to navigate the process of trying to install solar panels, the questions about which provider should you go with, how does it work, all the technical details. Would the honourable member agree with me that this bill not only has an environmental benefit, but as he is starting to address, the fact that it will also take away that burden from residents and address those concerns and create a situation where we empower residents to start from a place of working for a positive environment, getting those benefits of lower bills without all the faff?
The honourable member for Guildford is entirely right, and she will know that this bill includes the recommendation of setting an industry standard so consumers can have confidence in what they're buying. Now, I was saying that this not only removes the burden from homeowners and places responsibility with the developer, it creates an efficiency saving in human resources and materials. It's an entirely logical step to take. And installing solar panels on roofs while the houses are being built is 10% cheaper at least than retrofitting. Now, there will be issues around cost here, and people might raise interventions on that later on or in their own speeches. But government estimates put the cost of mandatory solar panels on all new homes at around about £5,200 per home. That sounds like a lot of money in isolation, but the average cost of a new build in the final quarter of 2024 was far in excess of £400,000. So we're talking about little more than 1% of the price of a new built home. That is next to nothing in the context of a monthly mortgage repayment if you take the figure in raw form. But that will be offset in the form of lower bills. So this bill would mandate that all new homes are built with solar generation technology covering the roof space to a minimum of 40% of the equivalent of the building's ground floor area.
I am interested in also solar panels being mandated on public buildings. So in my area, in Redknock School, they have retrofitted solar panels. Solar panels in educational facilities have two effects. Not only do they save money for the school, but they teach young people about that. Also, in my area, the NHS is looking to put solar panels on all south-facing roofs of hospitals. And I just wonder whether we could extend the bill, in fact, to public buildings in general.
I take the member for Stroud's point entirely on board and agree with him. This bill is limited to residential new builds. I was very conscious that in the public sector there would be a cost borne by the taxpayer in terms of the installation in the initial instance. He was right to reference schools. In my constituency, Bourneside School is installing a huge ground source heat pump, which is a sort of a national leading case study, and he's right that it's important that young people understand what is going on. In terms of industry standards, we need to make sure that there is an industry-wide regulator and a certification scheme. The industry needs proper regulation to give consumers confidence in the product. Supply chains were mentioned earlier on, and to allow supply chains, the construction industry and developers time to adjust, this proposal is that the regulations would apply from the 1st of October 2026. Ministers may have comments later on whether that is a realistic timescale and whether they might want to put it longer. I'm sure there will be a discussion. There are, of course, reasonable exemptions that need to apply in some circumstances. Those include for very tall buildings, for buildings in which installing solar panels would not be economic due to roof size or other factors, and for buildings which will have other forms of renewable energy generation installed which would be more appropriate for that setting. Where buildings cannot physically accommodate solar panels, which cover at least 40% of the building's ground floor area, the bill requires that solar panels are installed to the maximum extent possible. And now, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's important to take part in some myth-busting. To dispel one big myth about solar panels do not always need a clear, sunny day to work. They will continue to work in overcast, cloudy conditions, which is good news for this country, I think we can all agree. And to dispel another, solar panels can be installed to good effect on north-facing roofs, though efficiency will be a little lower in those cases. It is this sort of overwhelming case that means the Sunshine Bill has gathered support from industry. Over the Christmas period, several businesses and industry organisations signed an open letter to the government in which they declared their support for the bill. I'm grateful for the support of MCS Foundation, Solar Energy UK, Eco2 Solar, E.ON Next and Ecotricity. And I'm particularly grateful to MCS for their assistance and advice on technical matters these last few months.
Can I thank the honourable member for giving way and interrupting his excellent speech loaded with some fantastic puns that I would be very proud of. Can I ask him in his discussions with the industry what discussions he's had regarding making sure we have the correct skills pipeline to make sure we have enough installers and other people required to make sure solar panels can be installed efficiently and effectively, maximising economic benefit to this country?
The honourable member is absolutely right, and he will recall going back more than a decade, there was a thriving solar energy industry in this country, and sadly we've taken steps back over the last few years. In terms of the skills pipeline, I know that's part of this government's agenda too. I welcome that, and in terms of the date at which we might look at this, we would hope that there would be FE colleges putting on courses to make sure that people are trained up and more industry work too. I will.
I'm very grateful. Can you explain why his bill excludes the use of solar thermal panels?
It is focusing on solar photovoltaics. Solar thermal panels is a different type of technology and is not covered in this bill. Now, I would also like to thank CPRE, and the Honourable Member for Aldridge Brown Hills earlier on spoke about the preservation of land in green areas and fields, and CPRE support is specifically interested from that perspective. And it is also notable... Of course.
Madam Deputy Speaker, just to come back on that point, I think this is becoming increasingly, shall I say, worrying, because we are now starting to see policy around grey belt, and I really fear that if we do not really thoroughly grasp the issue of where solar panels are going and battery storage and all the other renewables, we risk green belt all of a sudden in a few years' time being then defined as grey belt, and it will risk being built on.
She speaks powerfully for her constituency, where I know there is a specific issue. Now, we mentioned housing developers, and one housing developer has put their head above the parapet to support, and I'm grateful to the support of Thacum. They are to be applauded for supporting this measure. Developers absolutely should support this bill for sound business reasons. There is a clear market preference for homes with solar panels because a relatively small proportion of the price will be rewarded with a decent payback, and customers want that. Politically, there is demonstrable cross-party support. In the last Parliament, 79% of MPs were found to be supportive. I suspect in this new Parliament, the percentage figure is higher. The Climate Barometer tracked support for mandatory solar panels on new builds and found a clear majority of support among all parties' voters. So doing this places us at the centre of political gravity. 80% of Conservative voters, 89% of Labour voters, 92% of Liberal Democrat voters and 63% of Reform supporters responded to the survey in favour of mandatory solar panels for new-built homes. These same constituents rightly look to us to make the right and logical decisions on these matters. They back this measure because all evidence points to clear benefits at every level, including this government's positive agenda on energy and climate. Now, the MCS Foundation research has found that mandatory solar panels on 1.5 million homes would equal the equivalent of 2 additional Sizewell C nuclear power stations. That should give us all pause for thought. And for a country that really struggles to build infrastructure, we must not look past these easier, small-scale wins.
Would the Honourable Member give way?
Of course.
Thank you. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Cheltenham for bringing this bill. He talks about the equivalent size of nuclear power that may not be needed if we have solar panels on houses. Does he have a view or opinion on how much pressure will be relieved from needing to build solar farms, which a lot of people in the UK have concerns over that use of green land? Does he have a view of how much pressure we can take off demand on green land for solar farms if we have solar panels on new builds?
My strong suspicion is that the market will help decide the answer to that question. However, it is inevitable that if we're producing more energy from some sources, then it will lower demand in other areas, and he makes a very good point. Now, I visited Hinkley Point on a school trip when I was 11, and we were told, very excitedly, that a new Hinkley C was on the way. I regret to tell the House that I'm now 40. On current projections, Hinkley C isn't expected to generate any power until I'm at least 44. Now, on the point of time, the new homes we build today will outlast us all. If we can make them work better for the planet, they will be a lasting testament to our efforts today in this House to tackle climate change. And they will offer protections against energy shocks that we've all endured too. That is what we have the chance to do today if ministers are willing to support the principles of the Sunshine Bill. We cannot and should not let this opportunity pass us by, and it is our duty to build a political consensus here to match the consensus among members of the public. So to paraphrase the great Morecambe and Wise in the song that shares the informal name we have given to this bill, let our arms be as warm as the sun up above, and let us think about how much joy we can bring to each brand new bright tomorrow. If only we can lower people's energy bills and help tackle climate change too. Thank you.
Kevin McKenna.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you very much to the honourable member for Cheltenham for... Oh.
Sorry, Kevin. The question is... The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Kevin McKenna.
Thank you again, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you again to the honourable member for Cheltenham for bringing this bill. I will try not to cloud the chamber too much with the puns that he's brought in. I will leave all the other honourable members here to shower the room with those. Oh, it's so painful. Anyway, I am really glad that this bill has been brought. There's so many good things in here, and I really want to make sure that the country as a whole is able to embrace this future of solar power generation, actually where people live, right in the hearts of communities and on their homes. It may shock. I've moved recently, in the last year or so, to ground level, as many people in my constituency know and comment about on Facebook frequently. But previously, I've lived most of my adult life in tower blocks. And one of the great things about 1960s council tower blocks is that you have fantastic views over everybody's roofs. And in all those times and the decades that I've lived in those, it's been really apparent that we're missing out in this country. So much acreage of rooftops is empty and devoid of power generation, where other countries have leapt ahead and taken advantage of this. But at the same time, I've also seen where this hasn't quite worked. So, you know, I watched a new block of council housing being built right next to the previous place that I lived in, over its rooftop, saw the solar panels go in, and then saw what the problems were, where actually the management company and the local council weren't quite able to make it work and generate power for people there. They went for a long time unused and not functioning. And that's the sign of a technology that wasn't quite mature. And it's only in the last 5 years that that's happened. And as I go around my constituency, and I'm sure as members go around theirs, they'll see lots of solar panels on houses and have lots of conversations with people in pubs who've installed solar power on their houses. And some people have had a great experience, and we'll talk at length about how it's reduced their bills. And unfortunately, others tell of the problems and the challenges of getting connected to the grid and the challenges of making it work, which is not a reason not to do this, but it is a reason to have a very clear eye as we go forwards on this change. And hopefully the Minister will talk about how we can ensure that this is successful in the future. So there are loads of opportunities, but we shouldn't lose sight of other opportunities as well. One of the most impressive things that I've seen in my constituency from an industrial side is the cluster of factories in Kemsley around Kemsley Paper Mill from DS Smith. This is where a third of the cardboard produced in the UK is actually recycled in one location, and it's part of a set of factories which use their waste products, use their waste heat, generate power themselves, and it's a circular carbon economy. And a key part of that is obviously more traditional forms of power production. For instance, all the cardboard that's not used in those factories and isn't able to be recycled, they're able to turn into electricity and use carbon capture. And actually the process of carbon capture is then used to support work in other factories. It's like the production of plaster board. And going on from that as well, the waste heat is used. Now, they are already doing great work, and they want to expand this further with solar power, particularly and perfectly placed on an old landfill site. And this is a great opportunity to do that, but also the roofs of the factories. But not all their buildings are suitable, and they won't all be. But as we build on that cluster and we're able to generate power locally, and also as we build more homes around them and in that area to provide power, solar power is a really important part to play. So I very much want to see that we are able to change our building regulations, make sure that our building regulations meet this need and opportunities for factories, but at the same time we don't close our eyes to the fact that there are many, many other ways of ensuring that we reach a zero carbon future. Okay, so fixing the housing crisis is absolutely not mutually exclusive to fixing the climate crisis. And what I would like to say to the Honourable Member for Cheltenham, he quite rightly identified the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis. I would absolutely add in the housing crisis as a third part of that, and I can see that he doesn't disagree with me. So what I'm really looking forward to...
This point has been mentioned a few times, almost as if there's a tension between protecting our natural environment and making progress on renewable energy sources. Does he agree with me that it's not a choice between the two, and actually one is actually central to the other? And does he also agree with me, and I speak as a former councillor here, that it's absolutely vital that communities' voices are heard, because if there's one thing that really upsets local communities, it's when they're not involved in conversations that directly impact them and the areas that they live in.
I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend. She's absolutely right. And actually the example I gave earlier, where power generation on the roof didn't work, was very much down to the fact the local community weren't involved in it either, and the residents in the block saw no benefit from it, even when it was causing them problems and leaks in the roofs and all sorts of stuff. So it's vital that we're not just having a circular energy economy, but we're having a circular economic monetary economy, so that actually people are seeing the benefits in their pockets as well as in the lights and heating in their homes. And so I'm very keen to hear from the Minister later what the government's plans are for building regulations, changing the building regulations, and hopefully meeting the aspirations within this bill and making sure that actually we have a comprehensive strategy to ensure that we have we progress to a zero carbon, net zero future, but also that it doesn't get in the way of tackling environmental problems more locally, biodiversity and so on, and housing and the cost of living. And it's all joined up together, and it's a way that developers can actually work with and deliver, and we can ensure that this happens. Because I think we all know that in practice with policy, implementation is the tricky part. Intention, that's very straightforward, and this bill is full of really great intentions. Getting the implementation right, that's going to be the challenge. And we've had 14 years of hot and cold climate policy. Sometimes from the preceding government, it's been hell for leather for tackling the climate change. At other points, it's not felt so certain. And it's not just developers, but it's businesses and homes and households that have struggled within this, because we've not been sure what the direction of travel is. So I'm really hopeful now that with our new government now, focus on stability as a key plank of our growth agenda, that we will give developers and communities and householders that certainty that they need to plan together. Everyone's looking for that framework. And in areas like my constituency that have been the most challenged in terms of housing and housing need, towns like Sheerness, where the housing stock is of a deteriorating quality, much of it was post-war council housing. It's not lasting. It's not surprising in a coastal area. It's so under, the maintenance costs are so high. We need a comprehensive renewal, and a renewal that will actually bring in not just better housing, but also give us the opportunity to leapfrog several stages of environmental learning and energy production, and make sure that this energy production is brought into the heart of my towns in my constituency, and I'm sure other honourable members want the same. So, yes.
On that point, I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. He's speaking with great passion about his constituency, which is always great to hear. But when it comes to new homes, of course, we have to look at their efficiency from top to bottom. This bill will add solar panels to these new homes, and we all welcome that, and I'm here to support this bill today. But does he agree we have to go further than that and make sure our homes are as efficient as possible, they're warm and cheap to heat? In Scotland, a private member's bill from Alex Rowley, MSP, could mean that all homes in Scotland are built to the Passive House standard, which I think is the gold standard right now. Do you think that's something we should be aspiring to?
Yeah, I'm really grateful for my honourable member for coming in with that point, because I very much agree with that as well. And also, while my constituency is generally not quite as cold and damp as parts of Scotland, it's pretty cold and damp, and when the wind is coming along the swale, as I'm sure people that live in North Kent will know, it can get really quite cold. and it's the quality of housing stock and the insulation that we have that really needs attention. And that's kind of what I mean by a comprehensive picture. It's not just about power generation, it's making sure that we're not wasting the power that's used, and we're making sure that goes back to ultimately into people's pockets. I know that other members in this House will talk with greater expertise than me and greater depth about things that are happening in their constituency and the opportunities that they see. So I look forward to listening to that and hearing that in the debate. I just want to make sure that as we move forward on this, we learn from past mistakes, we learn from great practice right now, and that we make sure that this actually works rather than all the false starts we've had in the past. Thank you very much.
Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the honourable gentleman, the member for Cheltenham, in his good fortune in securing a place in the ballot in order to introduce what is, without doubt, a very important bill. I am concerned about the scope of the bill, and I'll come to that in a moment if I may. And I don't propose to take very long about any of this. But I have consistently, for many years, opposed the installation of solar farms, which of course are not farms at all, on agricultural land. In East Kent, we are losing Grade 1 agricultural land far too frequently to both development and to the use for solar power generation, and it's completely unnecessary. As I've said many times, both in this House and outside, we have acres and acres of rooftops in public ownership on public buildings in schools, hospitals, prisons, in addition to acres of car park space, which the French would be covering in solar panels. And if we use all of that, then I can see no need whatsoever to use fine agricultural land that should be used for growing crops, for feeding people, for these purposes. And that's why I think that the scope of the bill, good though it may be, does not go far enough. We must look not just at new build, but also at what exists and what can and should be done. And just by the by, I would go a stage further and say that not only should we be looking at solar panels, but we should also be looking at grey water systems, because we waste gallons and gallons of water off the rooftops of this country that then of course can't soak into the land because we've covered it in tarmac, so it's not replenishing the aquifers. Now that water ought to be used for flushing lavatories and matters that don't require potable water. And again, I think there's a trick that may have been missed, but quite clearly what is going to happen, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the developers and the builders will scream like stuck pigs. For why? Well, let's take a development in Herne Bay, in my constituency. I won't name the developer because I'd hate to upset Taylor Wimpey. But they have avoided installing electric vehicle charging points because there's a bit of wriggle room that allows them to get off the hook because of the amount that it would cost, add to the cost of the property. And I don't doubt that installing solar panels initially would add to the first purchase price of the property. And of course that might eat into profit, and we'd hate to see that happen. But this is essential. We have to do this. And it's long past time. I've noticed that the bill says, I think it's 2026 as a start date. I see no reason whatsoever why we shouldn't start immediately and say every new build from now on should be fitted with photovoltaic panels. There is another issue, which is design and the technology. And we all know that retrofitted solar panels are pretty unattractive. Well, hideous, if we're blunt about it. And it surprises me that in this day and age, those developing this technology have not gone far enough and fast enough to develop attractive panels that are simply roofs, like any other roof. It's got to be possible, hasn't it, to develop a photovoltaic tile that could be used on listed buildings, but they're not. And I'll give way.
Well, member for giving way. I'd just like to advise him, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are several products that he is referencing available on the market at the moment. Thank you.
If the honourable gentleman can tell me of a photovoltaic tile that is acceptable to the people, who are enforcing regulations relating to listed buildings, then I'd be delighted to hear it, which is what I was trying to come on to before I was interrupted. Kent, a wonderful county, has very many Grade 2 listed buildings. And at present, it is not permitted to use not only solar panels or solar tiles, as I would like to see them, on those listed buildings, but not even on other buildings, outbuildings, cottages, whatever, within the curtilage of a listed building. And that, of course, rules out a very great deal, a very considerable quantity of property that can and should accommodate solar panels. Of course I give way the honourable.
Thank you. Given that King's College in Cambridge, one of the oldest, most prodigious heritage buildings, has now got a fine array of solar panels that it managed to get through planning permission, has happened. But will the honourable member agree with me that what we actually need in planning terms is that material weight is given to climate change as well as conservation status? That is where the crux of the matter is, so that all of those who are responsible for either listed homes or have homes in conservation areas can actually do energy efficiency in the right way.
Up to a point, I agree with the honourable lady, but only up to a point. I don't want to see the fine buildings of Kent smothered in hideous installations. So we have got to find a way, technically, of making these acceptable. And I accept entirely that retrofitting is much, much harder than new build. It is, of course, possible to inset photovoltaic panels into a new roof on a new build. It is much harder to retrofit it attractively. But I'd like to see us make much more effort to go down that road so that we come up with products that are acceptable across the board. Not just for new build, but for existing buildings. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think that it is absolutely essential that this bill does have a second reading, and I shall be supporting it today. I think there are flaws in it, but that is what committee stages are about. And we should allow it to have its committee stage.
Well, am I right on the brink of way?
Just one moment, and then I will. I think there is, if I may say so, to the honourable gentleman, rather too much wriggle room. And I can see canny developers finding ways of exploiting some of the exemptions, if we're not careful, that he has written into the bill. I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. Will he agree with me that one of the unintended consequences of this bill could be that it is no longer possible to build a new thatched house? And in Dorset and Hampshire, we welcome the people who are developing new thatched houses. How is that going to work with this bill?
The bill does accommodate exemptions, and I think my honourable friend makes a case in point. Indeed, in the village that I live in, we've got thatched buildings, and I would like to see more of them. And there may be cases where an exemption should be permitted. But looking at the bill as it's written, as it stands, it does seem to me that these loopholes are wide open to exploitation, and I think they're going to have to be tightened up. But that's the purpose of the committee. So let's get this bill into committee, give it its second reading today, amend it, bring it back on report on third reading, and let's see it become law. Thank you.
Tom Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of my previous employers used to run a competition for school children. They asked them to draw a picture of a better future where we tackled our climate and ecological crises. The entries were displayed on a wall quite close to my office, and many times a day I passed them and looked at them. Many young people had chosen to show a contrast. On one side of the page was often a burning world, now painfully familiar from our news feeds as our dear friends in California find their world set alight. And I'm also minded to remember our neighbours here in the UK who are still reeling from our recent floods. The children's pictures were sadly a good predictor of the threat. But on the other side of the page, where they showed their hope for tomorrow, children often drew homes surrounded by trees with happy people playing outside in the sunshine. And without fail, on the rooftops of the houses in those pictures were solar panels. Our children understood that a bright and sustainable future depends on clean and sustainable energy. Our government's mission to make the UK a clean energy superpower is a direct response to the climate crisis and a clear mission to make energy secure and affordable. Photovoltaics fit the bill perfectly. Simple, reliable, effective, they are the purest form of renewable energy, converting photons directly into electrical power, and we can place this power directly in the hands of homeowners. So the need for us to embrace solar power as part of a suite of energy technologies for a sustainable future is clear. Alongside offshore wind and underpinned by storage using green hydrogen, solar photovoltaic is a key technology for the UK to decarbonise its electricity and all the sectors and use cases that we electrify. And while the use of land for solar generation is rightly contended, we have a vast, perfectly designed and yet barely tapped resource on our rooftops. I will.
Thank you so much. Madam Deputy Speaker, in my constituency of Bristol and Woodstock, local residents are aghast that a huge mega solar farm is being proposed for 840 megawatts by the Blenheim Estate, which itself, people believe, has not allowed solar panels to be placed on the houses of the housing developments it has had in the area. So would the honourable member agree with me that placing solar panels on the roofs of houses is a much better way to diversify solar panels and build a community consent for the renewable transition that is part of this government's mission?
Yeah, I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I do fully agree, and I've spoken to many people who have told me that intuitively they'd like to see solar put on roofs first, and I think there is very strong consensus and agreement that that should be our direction. My honourable friend, the member for Sittingbourne and Sheppey, has already talked about some of the challenges of retrofitting, and I believe that we need to listen to the social science, harness new initiatives such as GB Energy, and activate local authorities to empower ordinary people to retrofit solar. We must develop ways for people to easily access trusted partners to help them decarbonise their homes and save money as a result. But, yes, I shall.
Thank you. So the average price we know to install solar panels post-build is somewhere between £5,000 and £8,000. Now, the majority of people don't just have that kind of cash stuck behind the back of their sofa. So does the honourable member agree with me that supporting this bill is both an investment in our environment and also an investment in reducing energy bills for all new homeowners, not just those who've got the cash to do so?
Yes, I thank her for her intervention, and I agree. And it's very important as we face a transition in a range of technologies, my personal professional background being in heat, that we put consumers at the heart of that and we make sure that it works for them and we find ways to make it accessible, easy, affordable and beneficial to embrace new technologies. There are new business models available that can help us do that. For example, heat as a service. And we need to be embracing those. But whatever we do, as we navigate this transition, I believe it's vital that we put people at the heart of what we build. And as someone who's worked in the energy sector for 20 years, there's one comment that I've heard and uttered myself very, very many times, more times than I can possibly count. We should be putting solar on every new home. There are very few no-brainers in politics, but if any were to exist, surely this is one. We have the opportunity to make a crucial change, to stop growing the problem and start solving it. Putting solar power on every new home will save people money, it will boost our national renewable capacity, it will be a crucial step in our mission for clean energy. And for our children, who hope for a better future for people and our planet, we can begin to deliver the homes that they have always dreamed of.
Charlotte Kane.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend for bringing this bill forward. I refer members to my register of interests. Ely and East Cambridgeshire, just after the general election, we had the shock decision by the Minister that the Sunaka solar farm would go ahead despite the recommendation from the planning inspector that it shouldn't. It covers a vast area of our green space, using up prime farming land, land that could be set aside for the benefit of nature, land that we might have used to build the much needed new homes. No sooner had that got permission than the lovely glossy leaflets from the next one came through the door with the next consultation on an even bigger solar farm across my constituency and others. And yet, as we've heard, we've got acres and acres of roof space that we could put these on. So why aren't we doing that? A couple of years ago, I was on the planning committee visit to a new housing estate that they were building, and I noticed just one or sometimes as many as 2 solar panels on each roof. So I said to the developer, why just 1 or 2? That's hardly making a dent in things. And his answer, that was all we were required to do. So this bill is really... I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I also need to refer the House to my register of interest as a councillor on Mid-Sussex District Council. And some 4 years ago, I remember sitting in training on a cross-party basis with Conservatives, Greens, Independents and Liberal Democrats, where we were asking our planning officers, why can't we mandate that all new builds have solar panels on the roofs? And we were told that we were not allowed to because it's not within the NPPF as it stood at that time. Does my honourable friend agree with me that in order to make the case for house building, to tackle the housing emergency, we need to be able to convince the public that we are building high-quality houses fit for a climate crisis and energy efficiency to reduce bills?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. I entirely agree with my honourable friend, and we had a similar frustration when we started looking at revising our local plan because we wanted to put things in about energy efficiency. I will give way.
While we're on planning, South Oxfordshire and Vale's brilliant new joint local plan proposes new homes should be net zero, with solar being the obvious way of delivering it. But this ambitious plan is now sat with the government inspector and we're in his hands. Does my honourable friend agree with me that local authorities should be empowered to deliver on their net zero ambitions?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I do agree because, as I say, with our local plan, we were advised that we couldn't do what we wanted to do because it would go beyond the national planning framework. And the local community want to do that, so we should be empowered to do that. So I entirely support this bill because I think it would be make so much sense to everybody if we were to make sure that all new builds had adequate solar panels on them, or where appropriate an alternative form of green energy production, so that people end up with houses that are not destroying the climate and where they can actually afford their fuel bills. I remember, it's quite a long time ago now, but I do remember when I bought my first house and I'd carefully planned out all the costs. Could I afford the mortgage? Could I afford this? And then the winter came and I started getting my fuel bills and I thought, oops, this is a bit difficult. So I don't want that to happen to people. I want them to move into their new house and have low energy bills. But I also agree, and it's not in this bill, but the government has the power to do this, we need to look at how to make retrofitting solar panels a good deal easier, how to make it easier for people to get the connection certificates that they need, because that is a problem, and I'm already getting casework about it. And I would commend Cambridgeshire County Council, because they have a scheme whereby local people can register to join in with a group purchase effectively, and by doing that the county council does the due diligence, so you know the supplier and the contractor, are good, responsible, reliable people, but also you get the discount of bulk buying. So I would commend them for that scheme. In conclusion, I think this bill is a brilliant start to making sure that this country can get to the net zero that we need to get to, that people have warm homes and homes that they can afford to heat. So I support it.
Chris Hinchliff.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I would like to begin by making a declaration of interest that my former employer, CPRE, the Countryside Charity, is a supporter of this bill. But Madam Deputy Speaker, many of my constituents are also passionate supporters of the proposal for mandatory rooftop solar on new buildings. And it's one of the issues that I've had most correspondence about in recent months. In North East Hertfordshire, the towns of Royston and Buntingford have seen rapid development in recent years, as have smaller villages like Barkway, Puckeridge and Standon. And in the near future, there will be a new estate built on the edge of Letchworth Garden City, and the town of Baldock is due to roughly double in size. At the same time, we face many challenging decisions locally to balance the need for renewable energy with the protections of our high-quality farmland, whilst also preserving and enhancing space for nature. So it is unsurprising that residents in North East Hertfordshire can clearly see the common sense in making the best possible use of our finite land by putting the solar panels we need on rooftops. Our approach to delivering the renewable energy we undoubtedly and desperately need has been far too laissez-faire, with potentially profound... Gladly.
I thank him for giving way. My constituency also has seen significant population growth, including 35% in the last 20 years. And new estates on Didcot, Great Western Park, Wantage, Kingsgrove, Wallingford, Highcroft and Grove, Wellington Gate have not all sought the opportunity of having solar panels on new houses. So does he agree with me that if we don't create the homes of the future now, there is a risk that we have to retrofit these in future at great expense in order to reach our net zero targets and to help residents with their bills?
Thank the Honourable Member for his intervention and wholeheartedly agree with him. As I was saying, we suffer from potentially profound impacts on the competing demands for space for the homes we require, our commitment to protect 30% of our land for nature by 2030, and our fragile food security. Government figures show that at the industry average of 5 acres per megawatt, proposed ground-mounted solar schemes put forward to date would, if they all went ahead, require a total land area roughly equivalent to Birmingham, Bristol, Manchester, Liverpool, Nottingham, Newcastle and Leeds combined. Yet at the same time, academic analysis indicates that between suitable existing buildings and new construction, there is potential space for 117 gigawatts of rooftop solar in England by 2050. Gladly.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Would he agree with me that it's a shocking dereliction of duty when the last government cancelled the Zero Carbon Homes programme, which would have allowed for the generation of around 3,000 megawatts if every house that had been built since 2015 has solar panels on them? And would he further agree with my residents in Taunton and Wellington who are aghast and want to see solar panels on the new houses being built in Commitro, in Staple Grove and in Monkton Heathfield?
I find myself once again in wholehearted agreement. Ensuring that solar panels are installed on the rooftops of new buildings specifically could deliver a generating capacity over 6 times greater than Sizewell C. Clearly, if we start applying a strategic approach, beginning with the provisions in this bill, we can host the vast majority of the solar panels we need on our rooftops. And other nations are already proving that this can be done, with similar regulatory measures currently in place in Germany, China and Japan. Better yet, enacting this legislation would not only accelerate our progress toward climate targets, reduce the industrialisation of our countryside and protect rural communities, it also offers the most effective way to ensure that the net zero transition lowers electricity bills for consumers. Ultimately, gladly.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for giving way. And I should also refer to my register of interest in that my former colleagues at the MCS Foundation have provided research in support of this bill. I want to pick up on the member's point about timescales because, in my experience, this issue is one of the things that's raised most commonly by residents wanting to see action. Why on earth, they say, are new homes being put up without solar panels on them? So time is of the essence, but isn't it the case that we've already lost many opportunities to progress this, in that there was previously regulations in place to come in 2016 for all new homes at that stage to require zero carbon standards, regulations that were scrapped by the coalition government. So given that, would the honourable... Given that, wouldn't the honourable...
We were out in 15.
After the election.
The briefing I've had says that they were scrapped in 2014. But either way, I'm pleased to see there is cross-party support today to press ahead with this at speed. And does he agree that speed is of the essence here to ensure that homes are not being put up without solar panels?
Speed is of the essence in multiple ways and would encourage the government to go as quickly as possible. Empowering households to generate electricity that they use will help families lower their bills far faster than commercial schemes that feed into wholesale energy markets influenced by international commodity prices. Madam Deputy Speaker, this seems to me to be a well-drawn bill, and I congratulate the member for Cheltenham for its clarity and flexibility. The only thing I would like to suggest is perhaps widening the provisions to cover commercial buildings as well. There is vast opportunities on warehousing space. I think it's estimated that we only use roughly 5% of our rooftops on warehouses for rooftop solar at the moment. Claims that these regulations would hinder innovation are frankly spurious, especially considering the provisions for exemptions where other forms of renewable energy generation are installed. It is high time that our country had common sense standards for rooftop solar on new builds, and I hope that the whole House will support this bill.
Lewis Cocking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the member for Cheltenham for bringing forward this private member's bill. And I do have some reservations about the bill, which I will go through, but let me just say I am minded to support the bill at today's second reading, because this is a much better policy than the current government's line around having large-scale solar farms across all of our farmland across the United Kingdom. So I'd much prefer putting solar panels on new builds than doing that. And I would like to tell the House that councils do already have some powers to be able to do this. I know that one of my local councils, Broxbourne, when I was leader of the council, has had extensive negotiations with developers, particularly at Highley, where we've managed to get solar panels on some of the houses there. And we've also got a large-scale data centre being built, and we managed to get some solar panels on that. But I do have some concerns. Now, I'm all for taking on developers and making sure they pay their 106 negotiations, making sure they do their community work, and making sure we stand up for the residents we all represent across our constituencies. But a lot of the negotiations I had when I was a district councillor, as leader of Broxbourne Council, with developers were telling me we would like to put them on more houses, but the district network operator said there isn't capacity to be able to do that. So, for example, we've got a data centre being built, so no one's going to see the top of that data centre. So I was like, cover the whole thing in solar panels. Why would you not want to do that? Why would you not support that? And that was my negotiation position. They went away and had discussions with their DNO, and they said, well, you can only have 25% because there isn't capacity and it can't cope. So I do think we've got to have a discussion around, if we're going to do this, what's the capacity of the grid? Because surely it is a good thing when we've got these large-scale data centres and warehouses in particular. I know this bill specifically focuses on new build properties, around being able to do that across those whole rooftops. And I suppose I would also... Yes, I will give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and he speaks passionately about his constituency. But is it not the case that cheaper battery technology means that people don't have to sell the electricity back to the grid anymore? They can keep it within their boundary and use it themselves?
I thank the member for his intervention, and I was literally just about to say about battery technology. So if he waits just a few seconds, I mean, I suppose this bill does go far, and in terms of its ambitions around on on all houses, and I'll get to all houses in a second. But I suppose we should go further than that, because if we're putting solar panels on houses, we should require those houses to have battery storage as well, which may solve some of the issues around connecting to the grid and have capacity to do that. Now, battery technology is a bit behind the solar panel technology and how better they're getting with efficiency. So I don't believe we're quite there yet at the cost effectiveness, but it is definitely getting there. For example, if you've got an electric car, it does make it more cost effective for you to be able to use that electricity in your car instead of sending it back to the grid. But we must go there, and I suppose I would urge the member who's bringing forward this bill to maybe look at that, because if we're going that one step and having solar panels, maybe we should go that step further and require people that are going to have solar panels to have battery storage as well. But as I said, I am concerned around the red tape we are going to put on new development. And as I've said, look, I'm all for taking on developers, and I see some councillors and former councillors in the chamber who all have probably had vociferous discussions like I have had with developers about them doing their bit. But I am concerned around the pushback we may get and the discussions we have with 106 agreements, because what I wouldn't want to see is developers then telling their local councils and communities, well, we can't give you money in the, and there's all issues around viability, so I won't go into all of them now. I wouldn't want to see them going, well, we can't give you money for the new school, or we can't give you money towards the doctor's surgery because we've got to put solar panels on housing. So we just need to give some thought about how that's all going to work, because we all want the most community money possible for those roads, schools and GP surgeries that must come with the new developments. And let me just touch on every new home. Now, there will be some homes where this is not suitable to do. I'm fully supportive of the fact where you've got an east-west facing roof, where it's a block of flats, where it's absolutely practical to do it. Of course we should do it. And it's been touched on before, earlier on in debate, by some other members around it is increasingly frustrating where you do drive past a development and you see a roof and it's got 2 solar panels on it. So we've gone through the whole cost of putting up the scaffolding, building the house, but we've put 2 solar panels on it. And I suspect that's because of the issues around capacity and what have you. So we definitely need to look into those. But come on, if we're doing it halfway already on some developments, fill the whole roof with it. Because it doesn't just help them. If they can sell that green electricity back to the grid, that helps everybody. So as I said, I have got some reservations around this bill that we need to go through around where the money is going to come from, and I wouldn't want it to come from schools, education and roads through those 106 agreements. We just need to look at that, and we also need to do some looking around the DNOs and capacity to be able to make sure that we really do harness this. But as I've said, I am minded, because this is much better than having large-scale solar farms plastered all over our greenbelt, plastered all over the countryside. I am absolutely minded to support the second reading of this bill today.
Linsey Farnsworth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by paying tribute to the Right Honourable Member for Cheltenham for bringing forward this bill, which is of a subject of great importance, and I know from personal experience the time and effort it must have taken to get to this stage. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure members on both sides of this House will agree with me that solar is a key tool in the renewable energy arsenal, which, if utilised properly, can have a significant positive impact on tackling climate change and ensuring we live in a more sustainable society. I'm proud to be the representative of a constituency which is taking the power of solar seriously. Constituents in Amber Valley regularly write to me wanting to know what is being done at both a local and a national level to tackle climate change. Even those constituents who are not what any of us would call eco-warriors are invariably unopposed to solar on rooftops. And that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is not, it seems, unique to Amber Valley. As I walked through Westminster Underground Station this morning, a billboard caught my eye. The MSC Foundation was advertising that a recent YouGov survey found that 3 in 4 voters believe that solar panels should be mandatory on new homes. Madam Deputy Speaker, when Labour took control of Amber Valley Borough Council in 2023, the council had no council homes whatsoever, as the previous Conservative-run council had sold all of the housing stock 20 years earlier at below market rates. To right this wrong, the council has started a new council house building programme. And while we've started small, we're working towards a target of 30 new council homes, each fitted with solar panels. Indeed, the Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero last year witnessed 4 new builds resulting from this programme on his visit to the borough alongside the Mayor of the East Midlands. It's fair to say we are committed in Amber Valley. Incorporating rooftop solar as part of our house building programme has been an important part of delivering cleaner energy, lower bills and ensuring sustainability for our constituents. When I first became a borough councillor in Amber Valley, I asked whether we could put conditions on planning that solar panels must be installed on roofs, and I too was told that that is just not possible. Totally perplexing, Madam Deputy Speaker, to me at the time. So I'm sure you can imagine I'm proud to be part of a government that is spearheading the most ambitious house building programme in a generation, alongside a clear commitment to environmental sustainability.
Will the Honourable Lady give way?
Of course.
Thank you very much I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. She speaks of the government's ambition. There's one simple thing this government could do, because in December 2023, the previous Conservative government shamefully issued a written ministerial statement under lobbying from developers to prohibit a council in my constituency, West Oxfordshire District Council, from insisting on higher environmental standards as a net zero development. Would the Honourable Lady agree with me that if the government was simply to revoke that written ministerial statement, local authorities across the country would have more freedom to set higher environmental standards, and will she encourage the Minister to respond to that in his remarks?
I would encourage him to respond, because I don't think it's for me to respond, but I do think that we should be doing everything we can towards a better sustainable future. Madam Deputy Speaker, not only are we building 1.5 million new homes over the course of this Parliament, but we're also committed to an ambitious decarbonising agenda, harnessing renewable resources across the UK. Now, the Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero, of course, understands the importance of solar as part of our wider clean power mission, and the importance of energy efficiency of homes, and that the contribution that can make to our net zero emissions target. There is no doubt in my mind that rooftop solar plays a crucial role in this. Madam Deputy Speaker, I support the notion of this bill. I understand that the government are already working on future standards, particularly on the technical detail of solar, to ensure that they are appropriate, that they will ensure that new homes and buildings will embrace energy efficiency and are fit for a net zero future. And I look forward to the government introducing these future standards this year. And I thank the Honourable Member for Cheltenham for raising this important issue in the House today.
Alex Brewer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. People in my constituency of North East Hampshire are passionate about protecting our environment, and they know that to do this, we need to move to producing more renewable energy. However, in North East Hampshire, as in many other areas of the UK, we are also protective of our arable farming land, which is so essential for our food security. Passing the Sunshine Bill, brought to this House by my honourable friend, the member for Cheltenham, challenges the presumption that the principal way to increase our solar capacity is through solar farms and large-scale industrial solar power generation. Prioritising solar panelling on new homes will allow us to create the right energy mix and produce energy in a sustainable way. Not only that, but it will help us address some of the challenges with economic growth. Reducing energy bills, especially for those in social housing or on lower incomes, is an essential part of tackling the recent cost of living crisis, while developing industry through innovation is of course good for jobs.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. There's been a lot of conversation this morning about the benefit to homeowners of having solar panels installed on new builds. I'd just like to add to that if solar panels were included when building social housing, then we would then be helping people who are most challenged in meeting energy bills, which have gone up since the energy price cap rise, and that's an added benefit to people in the cost of living crisis.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and she is of course correct. It shouldn't just be cost savings for those who can afford the installation in the first place. In North East Hampshire, we have some fantastic examples of community investment in renewables. Hert District Council has installed 121 photovoltaic solar panels on the roof of the council offices, generating as much as 57,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year, equal to powering around 20 average homes every year. Hert Leisure Centre has seen £200,000 of investment into solar panelling on the sports hall, which reduces demand on the energy grid for heating the swimming pool. Permit me, Madam Deputy Speaker, if you will, a little sliding doors moment. My house was built in 1961. Now, this technology wasn't around then, but if it were, and if solar panels of today's quality had been installed then, not only would our energy bills have been significantly lower, but we could have saved in the region of 800 tonnes of carbon. That's the equivalent of roughly 140 return flights from London to Sydney.
Wow.
With the government's ambitious house-building targets and with retrofitting more expensive than installing at the build stage, it does make sense to ensure we are doing all we can right now to protect our environment, to reduce energy bills and to secure this industry for the future. Each house built without renewables is a missed opportunity to save carbon, save money and grow our economy. But further, each house built without solar panels increases pressure to put them elsewhere, including in our fields. Sustainable energy development is absolutely critical, but in North East Hampshire, as elsewhere, we don't want it to come at the cost of our countryside and our agricultural land. This is why I'm supporting this bill to prioritise putting solar panels on the roofs of new homes.
Matthew Patrick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is an important topic, not just about solar, but about our climate, about our environment, and it matters to me, to my generation, and it matters to my constituents. My mailbag is full of constituents with ideas of how we get clean energy and advocating for solar panels. So I know they'll be interested in this debate. In fact, in my constituency, we have many experts. Just yesterday, I sat with a nuclear scientist from Wirral West, and we have many people, as I say, passionate about the environment. And in one quite brilliant architect, Colin Usher, we combine that expertise and that passion because he has brought intelligent design to build super low energy use homes. And alongside triple glazing, insulation and intelligent design, solar panels are a really important part. They sit on the roof, they heat the home and they sell excess energy back to the national grid. So brilliant is this design, one of the people living in one of these homes pays in the winter months just £10 for their energy. It's the high standard that I hope we could expect for homes in the future, and I really welcome that we have a government that has already made real commitment to developing the next generation of homes with high energy standards and efficiencies. It's better for our pocket and it's better for the planet. And Labour is clear that climate and nature, the crisis we see, needs serious action, which is why in the election we committed to tripling solar power by 2030. Solar energy has to play an important part, and it is an important part of GB Energy, supporting our mission to make our country a clean energy superpower. And these pledges are ones we're meeting with action, approving solar power projects which will power the equivalent of almost 400,000 homes. And I note that this government, in just 1 week, has consented to more solar than the last government did installed in an entire year. And I think that just marks the difference this government is already making on a topic that clearly the entire House is passionate about. I'm pleased that the Minister is developing strong new standards which will combine Labour's ambitions to build high-quality homes in the right places with to protect our environment. And our commitment to action will bring lower bills to my constituents, something sorely needed after a very difficult cost of living crisis for years now. It's put pressure on household bills, and this is a way we can really support constituents. And it addresses, through meaningful action, we're making more sustainable, renewable sources of energy, making a difference to our climate. Because I think it's pretty clear, the climate crisis doesn't respect rhetoric, weapons, borders, doesn't care how many likes you get on social media or how viral your clip goes. It responds only to action. And it's the action that this government takes that gives me hope for the future. Across the constituency in Wirral West, people are taking action, doing their bit to help shift us towards cleaner energy. We must meet their ambition for a greener, sunnier and more secure future. Thank you.
Ross Savage.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my colleague, the Honourable Member for Cheltenham, for bringing this bill before the House. As an environmental campaigner for the last 22 years, I am very much in support of any bill, including my own climate and nature bill, that encourages the shift away, shameless plug, that encourages the shift away from fossil fuels. However, I'm not in support of any and every measure that increases the use of renewables. And this is why I believe the Sunshine Bill is so important. There are good ways and less good ways of meeting our international commitments on carbon emissions and climate change. A less good way, as has already been mentioned by many members, is to cover large tracts of our countryside in solar panels without the agreement or cooperation of local communities. I will give way.
Is being put about between solar farms and rooftop solar is not a zero-sum game. They both have a distinct role. And in our most ambitious plans that are being put forward, it would be less than 1% of our land cover. And does she agree with the NFU President, Tom Bradshaw, that actually this is a diversification opportunity for farmers that we can all support and would be good for the British public?
I thank the Honourable Member for the good points that she raises. But I would like to see more installations of solar panels that are motivated not by profit, but by concern for people and for planet. And that is my concern about some of these very large solar installations that we are seeing proposed around the country. As in my constituency of the South Cotswolds. We are rightly proud of our beautiful countryside, so a proposal for a 2,000-acre solar farm has provoked outrage and objections from nearby communities. 88% of respondents to an early consultation are against the plans. Some might say that their sacrifice is necessary for the greater good, but when I put myself into the shoes of nearby residents, I can't agree. I love my morning walks, which help to keep me sane, well, relatively. And we need to be encouraging people to spend more time enjoying the outdoors, with all its benefits for mental and physical health, as well as strengthening the relationship between humans and the rest of nature. And when I consider how I would feel if my cherished morning walk through green fields was going to be instead a walk through fields of black, shiny solar panels past humming battery storage facilities, I wouldn't be happy. Let's keep our countryside beautiful. And it adds insult to injury for the people of Lavington, Luckington and Sherston to see massive new warehouses and new homes springing up with not a solar panel in sight. We need to meet our environmental goals in collaboration with people, not in opposition to them. My Climate and Nature Bill, which I will be presenting here next week, emphasises this need for public engagement on our journey to net zero. This journey is not going to be easy and will only be made more difficult if people feel that net zero is something being imposed on them by corporate interests or by government without respecting the wishes of nearby residents. Where ground-mounted solar may be necessary, let's make it small scale and community-led.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I thank her for giving way. This government's housing targets mean my area needs 9,500 new homes over the next 20 years, and thousands of my constituents are very worried about this. But I think many of them would be far happier if they knew that the properties being built were going to meet the needs of local people, and that means affordable to buy and cheap to run. Does she agree with me that this bill isn't only a no-brainer, it's actually an essential part of gaining public support for house building?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention and wholeheartedly agree. We also need to increase our national food security, decreasing our reliance on vulnerable international food supply chains and depending more on homegrown food grown to trusted standards. Most farmers want to grow food, not solar panels. The need for a national land use framework is becoming ever more pressing. We need a sensible long-term strategy for how we use our finite resource of land space in this country. I would like to see a much greater emphasis on multi-purposing our land area. We need to get away from having food production here, housing here, and electricity generation here. We can make much better use of our land when we take a multi-layered approach. So to that end, it makes absolute sense to prioritise rooftop solar ahead of greenfield sites. 60% of the UK's solar targets could be delivered on rooftops by 2035. Generating energy at the source reduces strain on the national grid, improving overall energy resilience and reducing the need for long, wasteful grid connections or ranks of electricity pylons marching across our countryside. Retrofitting solar panels to houses is costly and disruptive. It's so much more efficient and effective to install solar at the time of building. In Europe, they get this. The EU solar standard requires solar panels on new and existing public, commercial and residential buildings. The EU goal is to increase the use of renewable energy and reduce dependence on Russian fossil fuels, and it's working. To me, the Sunshine Bill would be a win-win-win. It's a win for the UK, reducing our need for imported energy sources and improving our resilience and self-reliance. It's a win for householders who can reduce their energy bills by generating their own electricity. And it's a win for the planet, supporting our transition away from fossil fuels. I will be wholeheartedly supporting the Sunshine Bill.
Rosie Wrighting.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for Cheltenham to bringing forward to this House such an important issue, an issue that matters to my constituents and me deeply. This winter, we've seen the devastating impact of climate change can have on communities, and I know many colleagues here and I have watched in horror as wildfires have spread through California and flooding has impacted my constituency and many areas across the UK. Now more than ever, we must find ways to weave the pursuit of clean, homegrown energy into everything we do, and solar panel will make a vital contribution to that end. I've had the pleasure of visiting many local schools in Kettering since being elected, and in every visit, children have told me that they are worried about our local environment and the future of our world, and I feel those worries too. I was proud to stand on a manifesto that promised to make Britain a clean energy superpower, pledging to double onshore wind, triple solar power and quadruple offshore wind by 2030. I'm even prouder to see the progress that this Labour government has already made in delivering these pledges. Only 2 weeks after the election, when most of us, including myself, still didn't know the way from the chamber to Portcullis House, the Secretary of State had lifted the ban on onshore wind, established a 2030 Mission Control Centre and consented to more than 1.3 gigawatts of solar projects to power the equivalent of almost 400,000 homes. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is clearly a department and a government of delivery, who are working to drive forward and increase rooftop solar, which, where appropriate, will help accommodate the government's 2030 clean power mission. The potential for rooftop solar is huge, especially in constituencies like mine, which is one of the fastest growing areas in the UK, and of course where the sun always shines. I have been contacted by many of my constituents who support this government's aim to achieve 95% clean energy by 2030. I understand their desire for solar and the need for it on new builds, warehouses and the ground. So I'm glad that this government has committed to ensuring that local communities continue to have a voice in planning matters, and that where communities host clean energy infrastructure, they themselves will benefit from it. The speed of house building in Kettering also means that we aren't strangers to irresponsible and difficult developers. So our commitments to the environment must go hand in hand with that planning. I know that the government will introduce future standards on house building this year to ensure that our new homes and buildings are fit for net zero future. But we also need to make sure that developers can't shift their responsibilities either to the environment or to local residents. And our house building needs to be sustainable so that local people can trust that their needs and the needs of the environment are being met. The government's national planning policy framework is a lesson in how we can deliver the biggest boost to social and affordable housing in a generation while unlocking green energy and recognising the benefits of our best agricultural land, all while making vital commitments to planning and ensuring and enhance the natural and local environment, protect valued landscapes and recognise the character and beauty of the countryside. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am grateful for the opportunity today to this debate, which provides my chance to put on record support for rooftop solar and for this government's commitment to our environment in Kettering and beyond. Thank you.
Carla.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 2024 was the first year ever to pass the 1.5 degree global temperature limit. This politically significant milestone is a stark reminder that we must leave no stone unturned as we make the systemic changes required to every part of our economy for a safe future. Rooftop solar is one of the very easiest of those changes we can make. As the member for South Cotswolds said, it's a win-win-win policy that helps cut people's bills, helps cut climate emissions and helps strengthen our energy security. Rooftop solar is already a British success story when it comes to research and development. We are world leaders. So it's time to take the next step and maximise deployment of on-site solar generation in new builds. That's the aim of the Sunshine Bill, and I am pleased to have co-sponsored this proposal to create new jobs, to drive innovation yet further and generate abundant amounts of energy whilst the sun shines and, as the member for Cheltenham pointed out, even when it does not. Making solar panels mandatory on suitable new homes is almost universally popular too. Other than, that is, with some of the major house builders. So that's where I want to focus during the short time I have available to me today. Solar Energy UK estimates that of the 15 gigawatts of solar power capacity currently in place, around 2/3 is on the ground and the remainder is currently on residential and commercial roofs, meaning that if we are to meet the government's targets to ramp up solar capacity, and of course I hope we do, then we should be looking up. Some 80% of the buildings, however, that we will have in 2050 have already been built, so we must work hard to retrofit them with renewables. But the remaining 20% have still to be built. So for goodness sake, let's build them right the first time. And that's where private housing developers come into the mix. The British designer and Grand Designs presenter Kevin MacLeod wrote last year that in 15 years, the profit on the average new build home has rocketed from £6,000 to £63,000 per home. So today, I call on ministers to stand up to the major house builders and make sure that they are the ones paying the cost of putting solar on every suitable new roof. The organisation 100% Renewable UK has calculated that mandatory solar panels and heat pumps in new homes would add around £8,000 to the cost of a new home, with that amount decreasing as the installations gather speed. My argument is that housing developers can clearly afford that cost, and that neither they nor anyone else can afford the consequences of not meeting our solar or other climate targets. The Los Angeles wildfires are on track to be among the costliest, as well as the most heartbreaking in US history, with losses already expected to exceed £109.7 billion. Failing to decarbonise at speed in line with the climate science will dwarf the costs of future-proofing our homes. The moral case for acting is now unequivocal, and so too is the economic one. If ministers are worried about the risk that solar costs are passed on to home buyers, the government could simply stop that happening. The government could also offer interest-free loans for this technology and make it easier for retail lenders to drive rooftop deployments. Property-linked finance or green mortgages are tools that can help consumers with the capital cost of installation, as could regulation to, for example, incentivise low interest rates for green mortgages. These are all political choices the government could make. The Sunshine Bill is not just about solar panels. It's also, forgive me, about shining some sunlight on who has the power. Making every home a mini power station would help rebalance that power towards communities. I therefore very much hope that the government will today choose to back both a solar rooftop revolution and mandatory solar being included in the future home standard, rather than choosing to protect the vested interests that are behind the vast and ultimately unsustainable house builder profits. Thank you.
Yeah. Adam Thompson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I also first thank the Honourable Member for Cheltenham for bringing forward this bill. I'd like to start off today by saying I think this bill is laudable and its heart is very much in the right place. In all matters of policy, we should be thinking of the climate crisis and how we might contribute to this government's goal to make Britain a clean energy superpower. This government, guided by the excellent work of the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, is already making great strides in combating the climate crisis, putting green energy at the heart of this country's future and supporting green industrial growth wherever we can. The government have established Great British Energy, which means we're going to need new green infrastructure sooner rather than later. When it comes specifically to solar energy, within just days of taking office, I was very pleased that the government approved 3 major, long-stalled, large solar farms in Lincolnshire and East Anglia, capable of generating 1.5 gigawatts of energy, enough to power 500,000 homes. This was a clear statement of intent, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I think one that we can all be very proud of. At the same time, Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero pledged a rooftop revolution, making it easier for newly built homes to come with solar panels from the off and to install solar panels on existing homes. A third of our solar generation capacity already comes from rooftop solar. It's an important part of the energy generation mix, and I know this government fully believes in rooftop solar, as indeed I do. I will give way.
Thank you. You talk a lot about the fantastic measures that are pushing forward. Thank you. My right honourable member talked a lot about the measures that are being put forward, that we need to move towards net zero, but we do need to go further. The campaign to protect rural England, Hertfordshire, says that 60% of our targets could be achieved by rooftop solar panels alone, so that support for this bill and pushing that forward will help to make sure that we can make sure that revolution really reaches net zero for our planet and our people.
I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention. I'm actually going to go on to cover some of these points shortly, if I could carry on with my speech, but I broadly agree with the sentiment of what she's saying there. The aims of this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, in promoting the installation of solar panels on all new homes, very much feed into the overall intent of the government, and I'm very pleased about that fact. I do wish to note, however, that it's undeniable that solar farms, especially the far largest solar farms, are much, much more efficient than rooftop solar for a whole spectrum of reasons. Rooftop solar panels are constrained by size, orientation, structural limitations of individual buildings, while solar farms are optimised for maximum energy generation. The difference in this output can be as high as 30%. Economies of scale mean that the cost to install, maintain and centralise the supportive infrastructure notably reduces the ratio of cost per unit of energy generated by solar farms. That's not to say I don't very much support rooftop solar, as I very much do, But I do wish to place on record the fact that solar farms are a highly scalable and cost-effective means through which to achieve the green energy transition. Yes, I will give way.
Thank the member for giving way. And isn't that exactly the point, that actually we need to be doing both? Because in doing both, you create a subsidy for more opportunity to have rooftop solar panels.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. I completely agree with everything she's saying. It's not about any one solution or another solution, but a diverse, broad array of different solutions, all feeding into a grand, greener future. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. He's talking about this being a balance. My belief is that where you have solar, it is better on rooftops. But if he's so pro-solar installations, how many thousand acres in his own constituency is he actively campaigning to see turned to ground-mounted solar?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I mean, I must say, I declare my support for these projects wherever they come up. In fact, I'm going to touch on some of them in a moment. I was recently asked by the media, would I be happy to have pylons outside of my house, to which I responded with a photograph from a window in my house of a pylon. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have long felt that despite the great benefits they bring, solar farms have too often been too difficult to bring forward. The UK has around 15 gigawatts of solar energy generation capacity. In Germany, meanwhile, solar capacity grew by 14 gigawatts in 2023 alone. It's clear that the UK's current planning regime and approach to building infrastructure constrains growth and sees us lag behind similar nations. If we want Britain to be a clean energy superpower, as I do, leading the green energy revolution, rather than just following, we must tear down the barriers to growth and unlock our potential. In my constituency of Erewash, my Labour colleagues on Erewash Borough Council have, in their own small local way, helped be part of that change we need. Since taking control of the council in 2023, they've approved several solar farms, while the previous Conservative administration always blocked them. I'm very proud of them having done so. Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was very proud as well to tell the now Energy Secretary this information when he visited Erewash this time last year. But the progression of these vital infrastructure projects, pivotal to the future of our country, must be driven by a national strategy and not held up by bureaucracy. As I've said, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the proposals made in this bill are laudable. The drive to green energy generation, with this government's ambition to make Britain a clean energy superpower, could be, to this decade and to those to come, as the race for space was in the 1950s and 60s. Countries engaged in a great contest of scientific innovation and progress. There is nothing that I, as a former research scientist, could welcome more than the government pursuing science, innovation and technology as a matter not only of core policy, but national pride. This government is committed, Madam Deputy Speaker, to greatly expanding our provision of solar energy generation, and has acknowledged many times the significant part that rooftop solar has to play in this expansion. I hope that supporters of this bill are assured by the government's genuine commitment on this front. The climate crisis and the housing crisis are both profound issues, both worthy of the descriptor crisis, and both in need of immediate action. I know that many honourable and right honourable members share the government's commitment to act here, as most certainly do I.
Cameron Thomas.
Thank you for calling me Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to pay tribute to my neighbour, the Honourable Member for Cheltenham, for so boldly taking up this cause. His so-named Sunshine Bill, which to my mind reflects his own disposition so brightly, as though it was his own glowing cranium.
on that point, will the Honourable Gentleman...
On that point!
I'd be delighted to.
Now, I may only speculate what it was that attracted my honourable friend to a bill for discussion and promotion of shiny surfaces atop well-built structures. We can only guess. But does he agree that as this bill moves forward, that it's absolutely essential that the government works across party to build a consensus, including all of those experts and those passionate in this subject, to work together to ensure that this is successfully delivered for the betterment of all of our residents?
Hear, hear.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and he so eloquently puts across the pragmatism that we can enjoy from Liberal Democrats in working cross-party for the benefit of our constituents. So I thank him. Madam Deputy Speaker, his undertaking is a topic which has been brought up consistently on the doorsteps across Tewkesbury constituency in recent years. Widely considered to be a blindingly obvious antidote to rising energy bills and the phasing out of fossil fuels, people have tended to ask with an exasperated tone why on earth new homes were not built with solar panels by mandate. As my colleague has described, the public roundly supports such measures, with one poll registering 70% in support. Whether or not the New Homes Solar Generation Bill goes to a vote today, I hope that the Government will recognise the alignment with its environmental pledges, that they will take the ball and run with it. Thank you.
Tonya Antoniazza.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for introducing this bill. Rooftop solar panels are a huge area of huge potential. And I'd also like to thank him for, on such a grey day, bringing all the sunshine. So thank you very much. That's why I am pleased that the Government is already exploring rooftop panels on new build houses in the Clean Power 2030 Action Plan, which is aiming to have at least 95% of Great Britain's electricity produced by clean energy by 2030. This Government relaunched the Solar Task Force quickly after the general election, bringing together experts from the Government and industry. And I note that the Task Force Solar Roadmap is due to be published in the spring, setting out recommendations for how we can triple the UK's solar capacity by 2030, and I look forward to that. I'd like to speak to the pylon issue that's been brought up as well, and I'd like to say I grew up under a pylon home for nearly 50 years, and I don't think it's done me any harm. But I know the Government is due to introduce further standards later this year, setting our new homes and buildings on a path that moves away from relying on volatile fossil fuels and ensures they are fit for a net zero future. And I'm sure the Minister will lay out more on this. But as well as new builds, it is important that people know that there are assistance packages out there to help us with installing solar panels on existing homes. This includes the Energy Company obligation and the Warm Homes Local Grant and Warm Homes social funding. Owners of solar panels can also be paid for surplus electricity they generate from solar panels through the Smart Export Guarantee, and there is a zero rate of VAT on residential solar panels. Now, much of what is being covered today is actually devolved, as you didn't know I was Welsh. And for my constituents in Gower and across Wales, I point to the Welsh Government's NEST programme, which can provide free energy efficiency improvements for those eligible, including solar panels. And one point I would like to pick up from the bill is the text on this states that it will extend to England and Wales. But of course, the Honourable Member will be aware that building regulations are devolved. And so what conversations has he had with the Welsh Government or members of the Senedd about this? I'm sure that the Welsh Labour Government would be delighted to work alongside the UK Labour Government, they probably already are, in ensuring homes are more efficient, energy efficient, and that our constituents have the opportunities to save money on their bills. The important thing about the path forward is that the Government should work with house builders to get the best outcomes for both our environmental targets and our housing targets. And we also need to be building high quality, sustainable, affordable homes. Now, as has been mentioned by many, the scope of the bill does not cover other roofs. It is specific to new builds. And I would say that because they're outside the scope of this bill, I would like to highlight the need for solar panels on all roofs, because as the Honourable Member, the Right Honourable Member for Herne Bay and Sandwich, Sir Roger Gale, has said, we have to take consideration of the agricultural land that we need for food and feeding our country, and we do have to have a balance and a fair and right balance. And I know that the Honourable Member for the South Cotswolds has also raised this issue. I feel very passionately that we must not do down one and be very aware that there are problems, particularly with tenant farmers and how they are being treated by companies. So where there are bad actors, I know that our government, my government, will seek to find them and hope that they will work in collaboration with farmers that may need to have the blend and have solar farms on their land, but also with tenant farmers as well. So I know this government is committed to finding a workable way forward on this issue. I thank the honourable member for the chance to highlight this today and for the sunshine he has brought. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I now call Pippa Airlings.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for energy security and net zero, I'm delighted to support this bill brought forward by my honourable friend's private member bill, aka the Sunshine Bill. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd quite like to say, in fact, I'm beaming. Now, South Cambridgeshire is one of the fastest growing constituencies in the country in terms of house building and lab space. And constantly people are saying to me, why are all of these new homes without solar panels on their roofs? Or why do these new homes only have 1 or 2 solar panels or on part of the roofs? Sadly, in 2025, now, still, developers are only required to meet, not exceed, the Merton Rule's inadequate 10% energy improvement standard. And that's why Liberal Democrat councillors in my constituency have been pushing hard to change this at the local level. In fact, in the 5 years since they took control of the council, the district of South Cambridgeshire rapidly became the constituency with the highest number of solar panels fitted and the fastest increase in planning applications that had solar panels included. It is the ambition and political will lacking at the national level that has held back a revolution in solar rooftops. And that is why we are still building homes that are cold, damp, or have skyrocketing energy bills. It was the former Conservative government that disgracefully scrapped the zero carbon homes policy and have dithered and delayed with the future homes standard.
Will you take an intervention?
I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. So the honourable member behind, I think, in good faith, erred earlier when he lamented the drawdown of environmental pledges in 2016. But it, of course, wasn't the coalition government. What we saw, what we got, was what happens when the Liberal Democrats are no longer there to hold people to account.
It wouldn't surprise everyone to say that I agree absolutely wholeheartedly and that the record is corrected for that. And that's why it's vital that this bill helps repair that damage, and I welcome the Minister's commitments in terms of bringing about the changes, and we look forward to that. And as has been mentioned, this lack of ambition in solar rooftop revolution has contributed to and a barrier to the public acceptance of larger scale solar farms. We are hearing people say, as has been mentioned in the chamber, why not first on rooftops of homes, industrial, commercial, warehouses first? What we need is a joined up plan. We absolutely need the government to urgently bring forward the much promised land use framework and NESO's spatial strategic energy plan that will show how much solar farm energy is still needed and where it is best suited to be placed. In that way, we can actually meet all of the needs that we have. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is our chance to get this right. This is our chance for a cleaner, greener and more secure future that addresses the triple cost of living, housing and climate crises and takes people with us. And I congratulate my honourable friend.
Claire Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the member opposite for bringing this sunshine to the chamber today. Madam Deputy Speaker, the horrific wildfires which rage in California and the recent floodings have provided yet more reminders of the urgent action needed to tackle the climate and nature emergency. I'm proud that under this Labour government, the UK is once again showing climate leadership. We know that we can't tackle the housing crisis without tackling the climate crisis, and neither can we achieve our core mission of growth or increase living standards without acknowledging the huge impact of climate change. The built environment, as we know, is responsible for 40% of emissions, and decarbonising our housing stock is absolutely essential. As a member of the Climate Tech APPG, which is chaired by my honourable friend, the Member of Parliament for Exeter, I was pleased to attend an event in Parliament recently where we met with startups who are working on innovative solutions to decarbonise the built environment. The government's steadfast commitment on this agenda and to policies such as GB Energy and the Warm Homes Plan were warmly welcomed by the businesses I met there. Turning now to my local constituency, Madam Deputy Speaker, I wanted to share an example of how a local business in Bangor-over-Conway can use the expansion and rooftop solar and indeed low-carbon heating and energy generation to help our government achieve this mission of stimulating economic growth and raising living standards in all parts of the country. I recently visited a Marks & Spencer's, a former Marks & Spencer's, I should say, on Moston Street in Llandudno. The owners are transforming that empty retail unit into a massive indoor space, an indoor entertainment centre, and it's exactly the kind of development that places like this need. What they've done there is install a huge solar array of, which will save that business just there £32,000 a year and saving about 25 tonnes of carbon. The most exciting part of this development for me is the fact that that installation was done part funded by the local authority but installed by a local business. Madam Deputy Speaker, we just don't want the cleaner, cheaper energy that rooftop solar will provide. We want the jobs, because a rapid expansion, not just in rooftop solar. Yes.
Give way. She speaks precisely about the jobs that this measure will generate, and I will declare an interest in that between speeches I've been emailing to arrange the installation of solar array on my own home in the next couple of weeks. So whilst I'm too late to benefit from the benefits and the reduction in cost for the installation and for the panels themselves that this bill would provide by boosting the market and boosting the demand for the skills. Does she agree that the economic benefit that this will bring, the skills that it will bring to our residents, is another incredibly positive reason why we should be backing the measures in this bill and ensuring that these measures are implemented as soon as possible?
Thank you, and thank you for that intervention. I absolutely agree, but this is why we absolutely need to get this right, not just for rooftop solar, but for the skills for retrofitting, for low-carbon heating in general. There is a lot of work that needs to be done, I think, to make sure that businesses have the skills so that we can expand and do what we need with this whole agenda. So I think that's my final point, really. We just need to make sure that local businesses benefit from the jobs and supply chain opportunities that the expansion in low-carbon heating and rooftop solar will provide. Because tackling climate change and increasing living standards go hand in hand. It's absolutely critical that we get this whole piece right.
Yeah. I now call Shadow Minister Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I would like to firstly commend the Honourable Gentleman for Cheltenham on bringing this important issue to the House today. And it's good to see the Minister in his place. I know that he and his ministers in our department or his department have had a very busy week. And solar energy has an essential role to play in decarbonising our power sector by putting otherwise unused roof space to good use. Solar panels are an effective technology for reducing carbon emissions, and this bill proposes a forward-looking measure that would require the installation of solar PV generation equipment on new homes. Its second reading today offers us an opportunity to debate the merits of this proposal and its potential contribution to our shared goal of reaching net zero by 2050. And today, while welcoming this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the aims of the legislation outlined this morning, I'd just like to add to the debate about some of the what I believe are unintended possible consequences with the bill in its present form. And genuinely, I hope the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Cheltenham sees, genuinely be a constructive voice in making sure that this bill gets to committee. But just some of the issues that we think may be able to be strengthened on the floor of the House or on the floor at committee stage. And I hope that he knows that I appreciate his sunny disposition in the way that he brought the legislation to this House this morning. I will try and be a ray of sunshine as I get through this speech, and as we possibly get on, I'll be in danger of misleading the House at that. And I hope to be a very sunny ray of sunshine and a ray of light in committee stage should we have to bring amendments to the piece of legislation should it get through. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the last government we supported solar energy generation where it was appropriate. Our efforts included a £50 million fund aimed at supporting rooftop solar installations to enhance on-farm energy security. However, the responsibility for advancing solar and renewable energy now rests with this government, and we wish them luck while they do it, while remaining sceptical about the abilities of GB Energy to see that through. And under the last government's leadership, we delivered 2.5 million homes since 2010, including 1 million homes during our final term in office. This provided more people with the opportunity to own their homes and expand options for renters. And additionally, in November 2023, as has been outlined by a number of members of this House, the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government announced expanded development rights, making it easier for homeowners and businesses to install rooftop solar panels without the need for planning permission in most cases. This was a positive step, and I hope to see such support continue. Now, as the government pledges to deliver 1.5 million homes within this Parliament, we must ask ourselves what impact this bill will have on house building. Building costs are already high and projected to rise further. Even the Chief Executive of Homes England has admitted that delivering Labour's housing target may require 2 parliamentary terms, not 1, as the Minister has outlined. I also note that the timeline outlined in Clause 1, which sets an implementation date of October 1st, 2026, provides very little time for the industry to adapt to the significant challenges it introduces. Given the growing pressures on the industry, it is necessary to question whether the government has considered and worked on the potential skills shortage, as was brought before the floor of the House by an honourable member earlier, a skills shortage and the feasibility of implementing these standards contained within this well-intentioned bill. We know that the UK has one of the oldest housing stocks among developed countries, with a particular complex system of housing tenure. Buildings owned by freeholders and occupied by a mix of leaseholders and tenants present ongoing challenges for successive governments when implementing necessary updates and retrofits. Meanwhile, in the realm of housing development, where 1.4 million new units already have planning consent, developers continue to highlight issues such as the cost of solar panels as a significant obstacle to advancing new housing projects. So we must also consider whether the additional costs imposed by this bill could hinder progress in delivering housing. Would it add restrictions to house building plans, particularly when it comes into effect in 2026? And we are open to the timescale that this bill will implement.
Would my honourable friend allow me?
Of course.
Would my honourable friend not accept that while it's not remotely surprising that some developers are resistant on the grounds that this will add to the costs of the property, which it indubitably will, the flip side of that coin should be recognised as being that it will enhance the value of the property and make the management and running of that property much more affordable?
My right honourable friend is absolutely correct, and if he allows me to elaborate further on in my oration this morning, he will see that I will look at the other side of the coin, and that while absolutely taking into account that house builders will have concerns over costs and will claim concerns over costs, as we've seen by various organisations, we also have a concern about the ongoing maintenance costs of these technologies for people that buy these properties in the first place. So there is a right balance to strike, which I think that we can look further down if this bill gets to committee stage. Maintaining solar panels, as my right honourable friend was tempting me to say, maintaining solar panels is not without challenges. Repairs often require scaffolding, which can be expensive. And we worry that this could be an unintended consequence of the bill, leading to increased costs for residents and homeowners and property owners. And how will we support homeowners facing frequent and costly repairs? Now, the updates to the National Planning Policy Framework also present an opportunity to consider how these requirements can be better embedded within planning law. And I recognise that ministers face a challenging task. The framework contains approximately 19 chapters of detailed guidance, which each local authority must reflect in its local plan after public examination, ensuring full alignment with those chapters. The complexity of this process, combined with considerations such as local environmental factors like surface water runoff and the need for materials to align with established local practices, creates a considerable challenge. And to translate the aspirations outlined by members into real-world outcomes, we must simplify the process for local authorities to fulfil their role as community leaders. Instead of requiring lengthy and costly procedures to prove compliance with planning law, we need to ensure that the relevant standards can be implemented efficiently. The previous government consulted on a future home standard to ensure all new homes would be zero carbon ready. This included provisions for solar panels where appropriate. And we must also ensure that brownfield sites are prioritised for housing development and standalone solar power, rather than sacrificing valuable agricultural land as we are seeing under these government's proposals. And I sincerely hope the government will build on the progress that we saw in the consultation from the previous government and from the feedback gathered. Now, as we consider this bill, it is important to recognise that not all buildings are suitable for solar panels. Factors such as structural strength, the direction and orientation of buildings and challenges with maintenance access must be taken into account. And as I believe the Honourable Gentleman for Cheltenham has recognised, a one-size-fits-all mandate might lead to unintended consequences or inefficiencies. I would be interested to know what discussions the Honourable Gentleman or the Government has had, or consultations they've had, which have taken place with the building industry during the drafting of this legislation. Collaboration with developers and stakeholders is critical to ensure the successful implementation of such a policy. And consumer and local choice must also play a role in this decision. In these decisions, I am concerned about the Labour government's apparent intent to reduce the influence of local representatives and planning committees, and local people should have a say in what is built in their area, as we have heard some examples from local council leadership across the country this morning. If this bill passes today, we will scrutinise it thoroughly to ensure that it balances the need to build more homes with the imperative to increase of energy efficiency and production. And while I welcome the proposed exemptions for buildings that cannot support solar due to roof positioning or other factors, these exemptions need further scrutiny in committee to ensure they are comprehensive. Sensibly, the bill allows for other renewable energy systems to be used where solar is not feasible, which is a practical adaptation. However, the list of exemptions shouldn't also allow developers to adapt designs to use these regulations to avoid installing solar panels and in order to avoid what they claim are increased costs. And as my right honourable friend on my side of the House, and as a number of colleagues mentioned on the other side of the House, I think that it remains a risk in this legislation that house builders or developers will see that there are loopholes that they can take forward to try and say, well, we can't build solar on that, so we're going to do either a cheaper alternative or none at all. And I think that working together on all sides of the House, in a committee stage, we could strengthen the legislation to make sure that developers are made sure that they put these mitigations on buildings across the country. Of course.
I thank the Minister for the Shadow Minister for giving way. When the Zero Homes Standard was scrapped by the Conservative government in 2015, a government report at the time said that scrapping of the regulation was designed to reduce regulations on house builders, and many people said that the Conservative Party had been put under some considerable pressure by house builders who were very generous to the party. So would he reassure me that as this bill goes through, if it reaches committee stage, that you will be in favour of putting pressure on the house builders to comply?
Well, that was me being so nice to a Liberal Democrat proposed bill. And I know that the Honourable Lady will know that the Liberal Democrats are the bane of my life in my constituency. And there we go. I was being very nice to a Liberal member who was introducing the bill, and she's come back and been quite nasty to a Conservative. But what I will say is that the contents of my speech clearly... Thank you very much. The contents of my speech clearly outline that where we have legislation before us in this House, we as an opposition will make sure, sorry Madam Deputy, we as an opposition will make sure that we take a pragmatic approach to legislation that means that people across this country have the right measures brought in, and if necessary, on that developer's side to make sure that we have the right measures put in place for new developments across the country. I'm not going to be party political and talk about donations. The last government had a very strong track record in reducing carbon emissions and making sure that we delivered the homes across the country that we need. We will continue to be a constructive voice in Parliament, as I tried to outline to the Honourable Member for Cheltenham, in saying that we will be very, very pragmatic and constructive in making sure that the aims of this bill get through, should this bill go towards committee. And the Honourable Lady has my assurance, as the Shadow Minister responsible for this policy area, that we will continue to do that as this bill goes forward. And while I'm fully supportive of initiatives to encourage renewable energy and solar panel usage, it's crucial to address the practical challenges we face. As has been mentioned, the National Grid's current infrastructure may not be equipped to handle a significant increase in capacity from solar generation alone. A recent article outlined that £60 billion worth of investment is needed into the National Grid to make sure that solar panels and solar energy can be put back into the grid in a sustainable way. Let me conclude, many will be pleased to hear, by reaffirming our strong commitment, and this side's strong commitment, to the UK's target of reaching net zero by 2050. I'm proud to say that we already have achieved a 50% reduction in emissions from 1990 to 2022, while growing our economy by 79%. As we continue on this journey, our policies must strike a balance between ambition and realism. I look forward to hearing more about the provisions of this bill and hope that this debate will bring us closer to solutions that support both our environmental goals and its practical implementation. Can I once again, Madam Deputy Speaker, congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for Cheltenham. I look forward to seeing him, if he's lucky, in a committee on this legislation, where, as I said at the beginning of my speech this afternoon, I ensure and I promise him, at risk of being sanctioned, that I will be a ray of sunlight when we work together to ensure that this bill is strengthened and passed to move into legislation. Thank you.
Ruth Cadbury. Madam Deputy Speaker, I congratulate the member for Cheltenham for bringing this debate, and it's been an honour to hear the many contributions in this high-quality debate today as it comes to an end. Madam Deputy Speaker, new homes must be built with 2030, 2040 and 2050 in mind, not the year 2000. So I'm glad that the National Planning Policy Framework has been drafted within the context of the wider climate crisis, so that planning decisions on new homes apply as a presumption in favour of sustainable development. And I look forward to the sunshine that the Minister for Housing will be bringing at the end of this debate, with, I hope, more details about supplementing the NPPF. In respect of domestic installation, solar panels have had a rough history in the UK since 2010. The previous Labour government adopted zero carbon homes regulations, but these were watered down in 2010 and largely scrapped in 2015. 1 million new homes have been built since 2010, with minimal standards for most of them for water and energy efficiency. Sooner or later, these, along with all the much older homes, will have to be retrofitted. And all our constituents really care about the climate crisis, and it's one of the most common topics in my mailbox. It's raised by children in schools and grandparents at residents' meetings. Yesterday evening, I attended a meeting of Osterley and White Green Residents Association in my constituency, where we discussed solar panels, and many of those residents who live in conservation areas want to be able to install solar panels on their south-facing roofs where they face the road. And they've asked me to look at this to see whether this is an issue of supplementary guidance or national planning policy. So I do look forward, in conclusion, to the Minister's response. Thank you. Steph Ackrow.
We have a housing shortage in North Norfolk. In particular, the houses we need to build are ones that are affordable to buy and cheap to run. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, most of my constituents would be far happier with this growth in house building if they knew the properties were being built to meet the needs of local families. This can be done. Some of the most energy-efficient, low-cost housing in my constituency has been built by housing associations like Broadland Housing, who have made mixed developments containing both expensive and social housing. It would be perfectly possible to do this at scale. But But the new regulations around solar panel installation, which this bill would require the Secretary of State to create, could also help to deal with some of the current problems and frustrations that exist with rooftop solar. For example, one constituent has contacted me with concerns that there was a lack of quality bird netting or deterrent on solar panels on a home on his street. It's caused a large influx of pigeons, and that's causing considerable nuisance for him and his neighbours. It may sound like a scene from a Hitchcock film, but this is causing daily frustration and could be easily avoided if the provisions of this bill were correctly applied. And I can't find any puns to add to that story. But beyond this, we have we know that anyone who wants to tackle climate change, Madam Deputy Speaker, knows it makes sense to put solar panels on the roofs of new builds. Anyone who wants to move into a house with low or no energy costs knows it, and anyone who's worried about excess solar farms being installed in our field knows it too.
Well, the Minister, Matt Pennicott.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by sincerely thanking the honourable gentleman, the member for Cheltenham, for introducing the bill, for the constructive spirit in which he has engaged with me about it, and for his laudable efforts, Madam Deputy Speaker, outside of the chamber, and indeed prior to coming to this place as a local councillor to promote the further growth of solar power. I know it's a cause he cares about, and his passion and commitment were evident in his opening remarks. Can I also thank all the other honourable members who have participated this morning for their thoughtful and well-informed contributions. It's been a wide-ranging debate, and the quality has been high. The same cannot be said, I'm afraid, for many of the puns that have been made throughout. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government are extremely sympathetic to the intention behind this private member's bill, namely to significantly boost the deployment of rooftop solar. And that aim is clearly shared widely across the House, and for good reason. Self-generation and consumption through solar PV panels not only decreases emissions and delivers bill savings for householders, but it provides security from fluctuations in wholesale electricity prices. And as solar technology becomes more efficient and more affordable, installing panels during construction is increasingly cost-effective compared to retrofitting later, a point which many honourable members have touched upon. The Government are therefore in complete agreement with the honourable gentleman that solar energy has an integral role to play in improving the energy efficiency and reducing the carbon emissions of new homes. However, I'm afraid we cannot support the bill today. That is because it is already the Government's intention to amend building regulations later this year as part of the introduction of future standards that will set more ambitious energy efficiency and carbon emission requirements for new homes. The new standards that we will introduce will ensure that all new homes are future-proof with low carbon heating and very high-quality building fabric. They will not only help ensure that we deliver our commitment to reach net zero emissions by 2050, but they will reduce bills, tackle fuel poverty, grow skills, foster diverse job markets, and make Britain energy secure. And let me make absolutely clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the House and to those watching our proceedings, solar energy will have an extremely important role to play in them. The Government's reservations about the bill are therefore not related to its objective. Rather, they stem from a recognition that the regulatory landscape we're dealing with here is incredibly complex and that we must take great care to get the technical detail right. My officials and I are working to develop the technical detail of the solar standards we intend to implement with a view to ensuring that they are ambitious but also achievable. Our concern is that passing primary legislation that doesn't strike that balance correctly could have a number of adverse effects, including on housing supply, the construction industry and local authorities. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, while the honourable gentleman's bill is not inherently flawed, we're not convinced it's the most appropriate means of proceeding for reasons I'll touch on shortly. However, while the Government will not be able to support the bill today, the member for Cheltenham has done the House a great service by providing honourable members with a valuable opportunity to debate this important issue. And in the time I have available to me, I want to give the House a sense of some of the practical challenges we've been wrestling with as we've developed and refined our emerging proposals and how these speak to potential weaknesses in the honourable gentleman's bill. As honourable members will be aware, Madam Deputy Speaker, in December 2023, the previous Government published the Future Homes and Building Standards Consultation, setting out proposals for what new standards should entail. The consultation closed in March last year. Over 2,000 responses were received, and some of the most detailed feedback the Department received related to the options it set out in respect of solar. The member for Cheltenham has, I know, amassed a not inconsiderable amount of technical expertise when it comes to rooftop solar systems, and he detailed in his opening speech he has consulted with industry stakeholders. He will therefore be acutely aware that setting environmental standards for new homes is not something that government can do in isolation. To succeed, we must take industry with us, and crucially, we must also ensure that the standards we set are achievable on all sites across the country. While it has certainly not dictated it, the expert feedback we received to the consultation, as well as our ongoing work with the industry-led Future Homes Hub, where we've been considering issues like design flexibility, has been invaluable in shaping the government's thinking with regard to what future standards should look like and how they should be implemented. The feedback we received to the consultation in particular drew attention to a number of practical considerations which we believe it's essential to take into account when determining the precise role of solar in new standards. I'll touch upon three of them briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, to illustrate to honourable members the kind of practical issues my officials and I have been weighing up as we've been developing the forthcoming new standards, and in so doing give the House a sense of why we feel the honourable gentleman's bill may not be the right way to achieve the objective I think we all share. The first issue relates to the ground floor area requirement. As honourable members will be aware, the Future Homes and Building Standards consultation set out two options for new homes. Both options included very high quality building fabric and a heat pump. The first option also included several additional elements, notably solar panels equating to 40% of the ground floor area. While consultation respondents were very supportive of the inclusion of solar panels, widespread concerns were raised about the proposed level of solar coverage, which many argued would be virtually impossible to achieve on certain types of homes, for example those with dormer windows. Clause 1, subsection 2 of the Honourable Gentleman's Bill sets out a requirement for the same level of solar coverage as was proposed in the consultation. Having thoroughly explored the evidence submitted during the consultation process, the Government have concluded that this level of ground floor area coverage is simply not feasible for many new homes, rather than just being challenging for a small proportion of new supply. Importantly, our concern is that setting a requirement at this level in law would result in a significant number of homes needing to apply for an exemption to the standards. This in turn could cause unmanageable workloads at a local authority level and possibly lead to significant bottlenecks in housing supply, ultimately meaning a reduction in the speed in which rooftop solar is rolled out on new homes. Determining exemptions, Madam Deputy Speaker, is by no means a trivial task. Solar panel systems must be designed carefully for each individual house, taking into account features such as roof shape, pitch, and features such as roof lights and dormers. As such, determining the number of solar panels a roof can reasonably accept is a technical design exercise for which many local planning authorities are simply not resourced to carry out in large numbers. Furthermore, any regulation would need to have an enforcement mechanism to deal with instances where unscrupulous developers simply didn't comply. The bill doesn't address this point, and again we fear it could end up being another burden that will fall on overstretched local planning authorities. Alive as we are to these unintended consequences, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government are determined to take an approach which is both ambitious and technically feasible, so that widespread exemptions are not necessary. The second issue relates to the time frame for introducing the changes. Clause 1, subsection 1 of the bill stipulates that solar PV will be mandatory on new build homes from the 1st of October 2026. Whilst that may seem some way into the future, the design and specification of new housing developments is typically set some considerable time prior to construction. As a result, the bill's proposed commencement date could risk a significant increase in costs and delays to housing delivery as developers are forced to rapidly redesign, including sites already in train. It's important to bear in mind that industry cannot properly prepare for the new requirement until they have access to the final regulations and accompanying statutory guidance. Preparing the regulations and said guidance is not an insignificant task. They need to be drafted and consulted upon, with the consultation open for at least 12 weeks to align with standard protocol and permit industry sufficient time to respond to such significant proposals. Following the consultation, the regulations and guidance would need to be finalised and passed using the affirmative resolution process. It's therefore unlikely that the full detail will be available to the construction sector until the end of this year at the earliest, giving the sector only a few months to redesign and get supply chains prepared. These issues are particularly pertinent for small and medium-sized enterprises who are less equipped to respond quickly. By potentially compressing this period to meet the proposed deadline, housing sites which are already underway may become unviable, leading to wasted investment, a negative impact on housing supply, and disruption to numerous local communities across the country, outcomes that I'm sure honourable members will agree we must try to avoid. The third and final issue, Madam Deputy Speaker, relates to transitional arrangements. Government typically minimises the disruption associated with the introduction of new building regulations by setting out associated transitional arrangements. These arrangements determine the limited conditions under which a building can be built to the previous standards. This gives industry time to adapt to new standards and allows work which is already underway to be completed without major disruption. When the 2021 standards were introduced, a 6-month period was allowed between laying the regulations and the standards coming into force, followed by a 12-month transitional period. This meant that the regulations were laid on the 15th of December 2021, with the transitional period ending on the 15th of June 2023. The Honourable Gentleman's Bill does make provision for the Secretary of State to put in place transitional arrangements. However, our reading of the bill is that these arrangements cannot contradict or override its main premise that new homes built from the 1st of October 2026 must be fitted with solar panels. As a result, we're concerned that there may not be sufficient time for appropriate transitional arrangements to be set. We believe it is vital that they are, given that the construction sector typically plans ahead by at least 2, if not 3 or even more years. Providing merely a matter just make this point and then I will give way. Providing merely a matter of weeks between publishing such significant legislation and it taking effect would not be realistic nor fair in our view. I'll happily give way.
Thank you. I've been listening carefully to what the Right Honourable Member has said, and would he not agree with me that a vote at second reading is a vote on the principle of the bill, and the objections he's been raising are very micro-technical objections? And would he not agree that the urgency of the climate crisis and the immense benefits associated with solar PV means that he should perhaps stop raining on the parade of this bill and give us the opportunity to vote on photons?
Well, the Honourable lady makes a fair challenge, but what I'd say to her quite gently is the government don't intend to proceed on the basis of primary legislation, and she may find that taking a primary legislation route may ultimately be slower than the way in which we intend to introduce the future standards later this year. So speed is absolutely an issue we're grappling with, but I just gently challenge the idea that this private member's bill is the fastest way to proceed, even leaving aside those what I don't consider minor or technical points. Madam Deputy Speaker, in contrast, the future homes standards that we intend to set out, the future home standard consultation set out 2 options for transitional arrangements, which we believe are far more robust. The first option involves a 6-month period between the laying date of the regulations and the regulations coming into force. The second option involves a period of up to 12 months. This approach to transition would ensure that as many homes as possible are required to meet the new standards in a way which is structured and achievable. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's our responsibility to ensure that the standards we set for new homes are ambitious, but as I've said, also technically feasible and deliverable. For the reasons I've set out and others I've not covered today, we believe that forthcoming future standards, developed as a clear and coherent response to the 2023 consultation, is a more appropriate and arguably faster means of achieving the aims we fully share with the member for Cheltenham in the bill before us. Maintaining consistency. I will give way.
Thank you very much to the Minister. Madam Deputy Speaker, on that point about pressure on industry, and particularly reflecting on the member for Broxbourne's points around industry using it as an excuse to push back on delivering homes, can the Minister give some assurances in the government's efforts going forward to push ahead with renewable energy, particularly on solar, that we ensure that we do everything we can that industry and housing companies do not use viability as an excuse not to help deliver the very many new homes that we need in this country?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend makes a good point, and I'm afraid the time is not available to me, but I could go into the government's intention to revise viability guidance this year to strengthen the Section 106 developer contribution system that exists rather than implementing the infrastructure levy that the previous government advised. So in lots of different respects, the government are absolutely ensuring that the commitments that developers make, they are held to. And more generally, as you'll know, in the MPPF framework, we gave significant weight to the benefits of renewable and low-carbon energy proposals more generally. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I was saying, maintaining consistency with the established direction of travel we think is vital. There is a history of environmental standards being committed to and then withdrawn by previous governments, which has understandably left industry reluctant to invest in preparing for new standards. However, since its announcement in 2019, the Future Home Standard has become a well-recognised framework, giving industry time to develop the necessary supply chain skills and construction practices. Many are already building to higher standards in anticipation of its rollout. There is a risk that introducing conflicting legislation at this stage could create significant confusion and risk reversing the confidence and momentum we've worked hard to establish. Let me reassure the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it's our firm intention to legislate for future standards later this year, as I've made clear, and to significantly increase rooftop solar deployment as a result. I understand that honourable members and industry alike will need more details about what the standards will entail before they can arrive at a judgment as to their efficacy. While we do need to take the necessary time to get it right, it's my intention to set out further details as soon as I'm able. A point in time I hope will not be in the too distant future. I'll give way for a final time.
I understand that 1.5 million Germans living in flats have solar panels on their balconies. Will the Minister also consider that as an option, both in new and retrofitting, while he's looking at this important work?
But I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. As I said, we will set out further details on the new standards in the not-too-distant future. In closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to reiterate my thanks to the honourable gentleman for bringing this commendable bill forward. While the government cannot support it today for the reasons I've given, we very much agree with the sentiment and ambition that has motivated it, and I recognise and appreciate all the dedicated work that I know he has put into it. For that reason, and assuming the honourable gentleman is willing, I'd very much welcome an ongoing dialogue with him as the government progresses work on the new standards, so that he has an opportunity to build on the important contribution he's made by introducing this legislation and working closely with me and my officials prior to the legislation being introduced to ensure the work he's done and the views he's developed are properly incorporated and taken into account. And on that basis, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope the honourable gentleman will not seek to divide the House on the matter today, not least given the fact that there is very widespread consensus on the objectives of the bill.
With the leave of the House, I now call Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With the leave of the House, I would like to give thanks to the Minister for his generous words, and while I accept that I will not be cracking open a beer this evening to celebrate the passing of this bill, perhaps a bottle of Corona, this has been a really important debate, and it has demonstrated consensus across this House, save for the Shadow Minister's local difficulties, which we shouldn't go into anymore. On the point of the energy mix, I think there have been a range of views expressed, and my view is that we do need a mix of energy generation, and it will include all of the things that have been discussed today. I'm pleased to hear this will come back for future discussion. I look forward to working with the government on that, and also applying that really important point of pressure to developers in a way that gets a pragmatic outcome, so we'll get the results that we deserve. So I thank all members on all sides of the House for the discussion today.
I beg to move that this debate be now adjourned.
The question is that this debate be now adjourned. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Date to be resumed, what day?
11th of July 2025.
11th of July 2025.